Chapter 9, A Lesley Christmas. It was a Lesley tradition to celebrate Christmas by a royal reunion, and this year it was the turn of Cloud of Spruce. This was the first time it had happened in Marigold's memory, and she was full of delighted anticipation. At heart a thorough clansman, she loved, without knowing she loved, all the old clan customs and beliefs and follies and wisdoms, as immutable as law of Mede and Persian. They were all part of that interesting world where she lived and moved and had her being, a world which could never be dull for Marigold, who possessed the talismanic power of flinging something glamorous over the most commonplace fact of life. As Aunt Marigold said, Marigold saw the soul of things as well as the things themselves. There were weeks of preparation in which Marigold reveled. Grandmother and mother and Salome worked like slaves, cleaning Cloud of Spruce from attic to cellar. The last week was given over to cooking. Such things as were concocted in that house, such weighings and measurings and mixings. Mother thought that they were really being too lavish, but for once, Grandmother counted no cost. I have seen many things come into fashion and go out of fashion, but a good meal abides, she said, oracularly. Marigold thrilled with bliss because she was permitted to help. It was such fun to beat egg whites until you could hold the bowl upside down and dig the kinkly meats out of the walnuts. Grandmother made a big panful of Devonshire clotted cream. Mother made the mince pies that would be taken in with a sprig of holly stuck in them, piping hot, for lukewarm mince pies were an abomination at Cloud of Spruce. And there was a pound cake that required 32 eggs, an extravagance known at Cloud of Spruce only when there was a reunion. Salome baked a whole box of what she called hop-and-go-fetchits, dear humpy little cakes with raisins in them, and icing over the tops and pink candies over that. Marigold knew what the hop-and-go-fetchits were for, just for pieces, for herself and all the children who came. Besides, Marigold had her recitation to learn. It was one of the Christmas reunion customs to have a program of speeches and songs and recitations in the parlor after dinner, while the hostesses were cleaning up and washing the dishes. Aunt Marigold had found a cute little recitation for Marigold, and Mother had trained her in the appropriate gestures and inflections. It was to be her first performance of the kind, and Marigold was very anxious to do well. She was not in the least afraid that she wouldn't. She knew her piece so perfectly that she could have recited it standing on her head, and every gesture came pat to the word, ending with the graceful little curtsy Mother was at such pains to teach her. Beulah would be there, and Marigold was sure that curtsy would finish her completely. Part 2. Finally, the great day of the feast came. Outside it was a gray, squally day, filling the little empty nests in the maple trees, full of snow, and surrounding the sad black harbor with meadows of white. But inside there was gaiety and Christmas magic in the very air. The banisters were garlanded with greenery, and the windows hung with crimson rings. The big sideboard was a delectable mountain of good things. The cream was whipped for the banana cake, the kitchen range was singing a lyric of beech and maple, and Salome was purring with importance. The spare room bed really looked too beautiful to be slept in. Grandmother's new pillow slips with crocheted lace 6 inches deep were on the pillows, and Mother had sewed little flat bags of lavender inside of them. The Christmas tree in the hall was covered with lovely red and gold and blue and silver bubbles, such as fairies must have blown. Everyone was dressed up. Mother in her brown velvet with little amber earrings against her white neck. Grandmother in her best black silk with a wonderful crepey purple shawl, which was kept in the perfumed tissue paper in the lower drawer of the spare room bureau all year round, save only for big clan affairs like this. Little Lucifer had a new scarlet silk neck bow, which he considered mere vanity and vexation of spirit. So far, Christmas Day had been flawless for Marigold. She had got lovely presents from everybody, Even Lazar had given her a near silver mouse with a blue velvet pincushion erupting from its back. Marigold secretly thought it looked rather awful. It looked as if the mouse wasn't healthy, but she wouldn't have hurt Lazar's feelings for the world by letting him suspect this. Again, Marigold was disposed to thank goodness people did not know what you thought. It was such fun to watch the arrivals from the window in Salome's room, where she had her shelf of potted plants. The ivies and petunias fell down in a green screen behind which Marigold could peep without being seen, or being caught at it by grandmother, who thought peeking at visitors was extremely bad manners. Bad manners it might be, but it was too interesting to give up. The folks getting out of the cars and buggies and cutters, for all three were in use today, would have been amazed by the things Marigold, whom they still thought of as a mere baby, knew about them. There was Uncle Peter's Pete, who had poured whiskey into his aunt's dandelion wine and set her drunk. How solemn and stupid he looked. Not at all like a boy who would do such a trick. But you could never tell. And Aunt Catherine, who, so Uncle Clon had said, was a witch and turned herself into a gray cat at night. Marigold no longer believed that, but she liked to play with the idea. Aunt Catherine certainly looked like a gray cat in her gray coat trimmed with gray fur, but her rosy, smiling face was not properly witch-like. Only Uncle Clon said they were the worst kind of witches, the kind that didn't look like witches. Uncle Mark and Uncle Jerry were coming up the walk together. At some former Christmas feast they had quarreled, and Uncle Mark had pulled Uncle Jerry's nose. It was years before they spoke. But they seemed on good terms now. Even old Aunt Kitty, who was really only a distant third cousin, was coming with Uncle Jarvis and Aunt Marcia. Aunt Kitty, whose bonnet had fallen off one day when she was sitting in the front pew of the old Harmony Church gallery, peering over the railing to see who was sitting below. Aunt Kitty had nearly pitched after the bonnet herself in her frantic effort to grab it, and had only been saved by old Mr. Peasley catching hold of her skirt. It had been a gay, wild bonnet of ostrich plumes and flowers, and its descent had made something of a sensation, especially since, by some impish trick of chance, it had landed squarely on Elder Beamish's bald head as neatly as if it had been fitted on. The Beamishes and the Kitties, Marigold could never remember Aunt Kitty's family name, had never been good friends, and this incident didn't help matters any. Aunt Kitty looked decorous enough now as she hobbled up the walk leaning on her cane, but she had been a wild old girl at one time, Uncle Clon said. Auntie Chloe was coming, too, who was an aunt of sorts, though Marigold could never get her placed. She did not like Auntie Chloe, and neither did Uncle Clon, who vowed she was certainly very much too ugly to live. She really is lovable under her skin, Aunt Marigold had said, fresh from a reading of Kipling. Then for heaven's sake, tell her to take her skin off, Uncle Clon had retorted. Uncle Archibald Martin and his wife Jenny, they were a byword for their terrible quarrels. But Aunt Marigold declared they loved each other between times enough to make up for it. Martin left his car at the gate, and she saw him stop Jenny and kiss her under the Scotch pine. Before dinner was over, they were calling each other awful names across the table and scandalizing the whole clan. But as Marigold listened to the amazing epithets, she thought of that long kiss under the pine and wondered if a kiss like that wasn't worth a lot of hard names. Aunt Sibylla, who went in for spiritualism, Marigold didn't know what spiritualism was, but had a vague idea that it had to do with liquor. Still, Aunt Sibylla didn't look like that. Uncle Charlie, whose laughter boomed over the whole garden, and Garnet Lesley, who had come to a bad end, so everyone said. It was interesting to speculate concerning that bad end. George Lesley, who's going to be married to Mary Patterson. Marigold liked George. I wish he'd wait till I grow up, she thought, because he would like me better than Mary, because there's no fun in her, and there's a good deal of fun in me when my conscience doesn't bother me. Gloomy Uncle Jarvis, with his fierce black beard, who never read any book but the Bible, and was always talking religion to everyone within 5 minutes of meeting them. Aunt Honora, who must have had her face screwed up one time when the wind changed, and who had taken a vow to never to marry. Quite unnecessarily, Uncle Clon said. Uncle Obadiah, whose great ears stuck out like flaps, Uncle Dan, who had a glass eye and thought nobody knew of it, and last of all, Uncle Milton and Aunt Charlotte and Aunt Nora. 30 years before, Uncle Milton had jilted Aunt Nora when he married Aunt Charlotte. Aunt Nora had decked herself out in widow's weeds and gone to the wedding. And now, here they were coming up the walk together, chatting amiably about the weather and their rheumatism. It's very interesting, looking down on them like this when they couldn't see her. But Marigold paid for her fun when the time came to go into the parlor and speak to everybody. It was a dreadful ordeal, and she shrank back against Mother. "You must learn to go into a room without thinking everyone is staring at you," said Grandmother. "But they do stare," shuddered Marigold. "They're all looking at me to see how much I've grown since the last time, or who I look like now, and Aunt Josephine will say I'm not as tall for my age as Winnie. You know she will." "Won't kill you if she does," said Grandmother. "You must act like a lady," whispered Mother. "Don't be a coward," said old Grandmother from a faraway moonlit orchard. It was old Grandmother who did the trick. Marigold went through the ordeal of handshaking with her head up and her cheeks so crimson that even Aunt Josephine thought her complexion much better. The big dinner was in the orchard room, and anyone looking at the table would have known that the good old days, when nobody bothered about balanced rations, had not yet wholly passed at Cloud of Spruce. But Marigold and all the other small fry had theirs in the dining room. Marigold rejoiced over this. She never enjoyed a meal in the orchard room because she was so busy hating Clementine. They were catered to by Salome, who saw that they all had plenty of dressing and a piece of banana cake besides pudding. Even Uncle Peter's Pete, who had been known to say he wished a fellow could eat 2 Christmas dinners at once, was satisfied. So everything was beautiful until dinner was over and the program was underway in the parlor. And then Marigold crashed down in defeat, and not even old Grandmother Shea could help her. She got up to say her recitation, and not one word could she remember of it. She stood there before thousands, more or less, of faces, and could not even recall the title. It was all Uncle Pete's fault, so Marigold always vowed. Just before her name was called, he had whispered into the back of her neck, "You haven't washed 100 years." Marigold knew that territory had been washed. Salome had seen to that, but it rathered her nevertheless. And now she stood, dazed, frantic, coming out with goose flesh all over her body. If Mother had been there just to say the first line, Marigold knew she could go on if she could just remember the first line. But Mother was out helping with the dishes, and there was Pete grinning and Beulah gleefully contemptuous and Nancy squirming in sympathy. Marigold shut her eyes in a desperate effort to forget everyone, and straightway saw the most astonishing things. Aunt Emma's big cameo brooch with Uncle Ned's hair in it expanded to gigantic size, and Aunt Emma fastened to it. Uncle Jerry with a long nose pulled out like an elephant's child. Uncle Pete's aunt dancing drunkenly after dandelion wine. Aunt Catherine, a gray cat riding on a broomstick. Aunt Kitty falling headlong after her bonnet. Auntie Chloe with her skin off. Uncle Obadiah, just a pair of enormous ears with a tiny mannequin between them. Uncle Dan with just one huge eye winking at her all the time. Dizzy, Marigold opened her eyes to come back to reality from that fantastic world into which she had been plunged, but she could not get that first line. "Come, come, have you a bone in your throat?" said Uncle Paul. "Cat's got her tongue," giggled Uncle Pete. "Bit off more than you can chew, eh?" said Uncle Charlie good-naturedly. Beulah giggled. Flesh and blood could bear no more. Marigold rushed from the room, flew upstairs, tore through Mother's room, slammed shut her door, and hurled herself on her bed in an agony of shame and humiliation. She huddled there all the rest of the afternoon. Mother and Grandmother and Salome were too busy to think about her. Nancy searched but could not find her. Marigold wept in her pillows and wondered what they were saying about her. I don't know if it would have comforted her any had she known they were not thinking about her at all. What was a tragedy to her was only a passing incident to them. In the rose and purple twilight they went away. Marigold lay and listened to the cars snorting and the sleigh bells jingling, and then to a tired little lonely motherless wind sobbing itself to sleep in the vines. a wind that had made its fool of itself in the great family of winds and dared lift its voice above a whisper. To Marigold came someone who had never lost the knack of looking through the world through a child's eyes. Oh, Auntie Marigold, I've disgraced myself and all the Leslies, sobbed Marigold. Oh, no, darling, there's no disgrace in a little stage fright. We all have it. The first time I tried to recite in public, my tongue clove up to the roof of my mouth and I snivelled. Yes, snivelled. And my father had to come up and carry me down from the platform. You got away on your own legs, at least. Marigold could not stop crying all at once, but she sat up and blew her nose. Oh, Auntie Marigold, really? Yes, Father said to me, I am disappointed in you. And I said, I wouldn't care for that if I wasn't disappointed in myself. That's how I feel too, whispered Marigold, and then Beulah. Never mind the Beulahs. You'll find heaps of them in life. The only thing to do is ignore them. Beulah would make an excellent mousetrap, but if she tried for 100 years, she couldn't look as sweet and pretty as you did, standing up there with your puzzled blue eyes. And when you screwed them shut, oh, I saw such funny things, Aunt Marigold, cried Marigold, bursting into a peal of laughter. Aunt Marigold's little bit of artful flattery was a pick-me-up. It was true poor Beulah was very plain. Oh, how nice to be with someone who just understood and loved. Nothing seemed so disgraceful any more. A truce to vain regrets. She'd show them another time. And here was Lucifer and Salome with a plate of hop and go fetchins. I saved 'em for you, said Salome. Uncle Peter's Pete was bound to have them, but I peated him. He'll not try to sneak into my pantry again in a hurry. I suppose I can take off this absurd ribbon now, said Lucifer, his very whiskers vibrating with indignation. A dog doesn't mind making an ass of himself, but a cat has his